So thank you for joining us. As you would have just seen, Medici the Magnificent, obviously a little slice of Italian drama that's premiering next Friday, January the 25th on Netflix. Just a shout out to the producers, Lux Vida, Big Light Productions and Altice Group. This is actually the second Medici series. You may be familiar with Medici Masters of Florence that launched in 2016. And obviously first debuted on Rai, the Italian public broadcaster, and Netflix brought that to the world. And similarly, Rai launched this series at the end of last year, and now we're going to see it on Netflix next week. So that's fantastic. Luca, let's start with you and just take us back briefly just to the origins of the piece and why the Medicis and why you wanted to reintroduce Renaissance history to modern day audiences.
We believe that the story of the Medici family was a story that was really interesting to tell to the world. Because the Medici they invented really the modern bank, but in a completely different way compared to the bank, to the finance which is existing now. Because what they did, they were giving money, lending money to little entrepreneurs, artisans, and they made them become something different from what they was. Before, as we were saying just before with Frank, if you were a shoemaker, you stay as a shoemaker as your father was. But it was giving them the possibility to change their life, and this is the project of Lorenzo, which was giving the possibility to his city, his state, to change. He was feeding his people with art, with culture, with the money that was needed to change. On the contrary, this finance we are dealing with now is changing the world in a different way. It's making the people starving, and it's causing trouble all over Europe. You can see it in all the countries in Europe. People are hungry and are searching for a different world. This is why it is interesting, because Lorenzo made an ideal city in Florence, linking together economics, culture, art, and his way of thinking. That's what was interesting even for Frank. Frank is always searching a hook to the modern time. So he has been writing a wonderful script and produced it with me, but always finding a link to the contemporary world.
But the ambition that we can see on the screen, that was there from the outset, was it? These fantastic locations, the filming style, the fact it's in English rather than Italian, that we would probably be less fussy about watching an Italian drama now than we would do in the past. So the fact that you sort of set it out as a global drama from the outset, how did you sort of go about that?
We decided, for example, not to go and shoot it in a stage, in a studio. What you have seen has been shot in Pienza, Montepulciano, Florence, Volterra. We have been traveling all over Tuscany in order to give the idea of what was it really. We have been shooting in museums, in places that nobody will see it again, and that was one of the key, even giving to the people that are going to watch it a sense of what they were really doing. So the actor, they have been working in the same palace and building that Medici has been working 500 years ago.
Fantastic. And Matilda, tell us a bit about this. Is a Rai commission that Netflix then came on board with and has obviously brought to the world. So just tell us a bit about that relationship and how you have been involved in pulling those strings together.
Yes. This is one of the first real collaboration from some traditional broadcasting service and from VOD platforms. Now, this is a possibility that we had because we started from a little country like Italy with a great story and culture, but we need to be motivated and to be more brilliant to find a financial solution. And I think that this is an example on that we start with big lights, movie stars, artists, and before Netflix was streaming in Italy, we make with them for UK, US, and Canada an agreement that is for Lorenzo in special a big selection in this situation of new economy for the TV series. And like Luca told, the Medici arrived in a very bad situation for the economy and for the political story at that moment. And this can be a motivation, an inspiration. We hope for the
Nowadays leader.
yes.
We have to say thanks to Rai, to the new head of fiction, Tini Andreatta, which has been developing this international show, like Medici, like My Brilliant Friend. There has been there is a new renaissance in Italy, even for that, according to the people, which is ruling fiction. And now you're right.
And so, Frank, I mean, tell us the story. Obviously, season 1 we had Dustin Hoffman, we had Richard Madden playing Cosimo, who is the grandfather of Lorenzo, who is referenced quite frequently in the first episode. So you had the link there. But tell us a bit about maybe how that story ended, and then why we jumped 20 years to Lorenzo, and why you chose that story to pick up.
The previous series about Cosimo and his father Giovanni, it wasn't even obvious there was a TV series in that, and the more we looked into it, the more we thought there was, because it was about a son trying to determine his own destiny and being sort of overruled by his father, and that was very moving. This chapter is the most obviously dramatic chapter in all the Medici saga, and we took far fewer liberties with history this time than we did in the previous series. This is all basically, there's a lot of compression of time and characters, but it hews much closer to the actual history because the actual history is so dramatic. He did have to take over from his father. His father had mismanaged the bank. The assassination attempt, most of the incidents you saw in this episode are not far off from what actually happened, although they happened a bit faster in our storytelling. But it's an incredible journey this season, and I do feel that contemporary resonance is really strong. You've got this younger generation coming to power, seeing the world as a mess, having this idealistic vision of trying to do good, be good to do good. And we're going to see the walls that this generation hits, represented primarily by Sean Bean's character, Jacopo Pazzi. And it culminates in this amazing chapter in history, which is known as the Pazzi Conspiracy. So if you want to ruin this season for yourself, go on Wikipedia right now and look it up. Otherwise, wait and see what happens. But it's one of the greatest true life conspiracy thrillers of all time. And so it's just great cinema, great storytelling. And it was very exciting to tell it. And I also have to say, you're talking about the Italian Renaissance. It really is Luca and Matilda and Lux's ambition that has made this project possible. And it's the greatest ambition because in every respect they want this to be the best possible kind of television series. And the cast we've assembled, filming on the real locations in Italy. There's never any department where we're not aiming for the best, which is a very exciting environment to work in.
We saw it in the first episode, but it's clear that Lorenzo and Jacopo have deeply opposite ideologies. I mean, can you tell us how that plays out. And I mean, you mentioned there, you know, modern day politics. We've got new ideas coming through, old guard sort of staying in the way. So you obviously feel that it's very resonant to today. Was that in the writing when you were thinking about that?
It absolutely was. I mean, I think we all essentially can't help but read the news every day. It's like the world right now is in turmoil, and it's a bit frightening. You know, which direction are we going to go? And I do feel like the younger generation didn't create this world, but they're growing up into it. And what will they do? And how will they try and right the course? And that is very much Lorenzo's journey. And I should say that this is a 2-season journey. So this season ends with the Pazzi conspiracy, which is this massive, thrilling climax, and then the story continues through 8 episodes in the next season, which we just completed filming last month in Italy. And so, you know, you don't know how the story is going to turn out. You may think you know it's a simple thing of good versus evil and cynicism versus idealism. It's not that simple at all. And there are to this day, there are people who think Lorenzo was a great hero and people who think he was a villain. And I think we do, I hope we do a really good job of sort of exploring the gray areas of his journey.
Mm-hmm. And you talked a bit about you know, the history and how you've basically mostly taken history and just put it onto the screen. But talk us a bit about the research that you did and how did you decide what to keep in and what to compress and what to leave out?
Well, we had sort of a base of knowledge from the first series, and we had amazing support from the historians who are credited there on screen, and from everybody at Lux, and we did a lot of reading ourselves. But you know, I realized, you know, doing history, it is a process of interpretation, trying to make a 21st century audience connect to, understand, be moved by characters who lived, you know, 500, 600 years ago. But in this case, as I say, the story itself was so rich with incident and drama, it was about editing things out. It was about, you know, how much space do we have to tell this story and make it comprehensible in the time we have, because there's far more that actually went on than we need double the number of episodes to really tell the entire saga.
Fantastic, great. And I'm going to jump to Bradley, if that's okay, as
Hello, sir.
Lorenzo's brother, Giuliano. I mean, just tell us a bit about him, because we see him in the first episode. He's in bed, he's fighting, he's very hot-tempered. He's very much the opposite, maybe, of Lorenzo. So tell us a bit about Giuliano and how we see him through the series, and more importantly, maybe his relationship with Lorenzo, who's holding up the family.
The first time I saw me in bed at the beginning of that episode, I was sat directly behind my mum. My face went the colour pretty much of that sofa these two gentlemen sat on, and I think the heat that permeated from me made everybody sweat. Yeah. I was saying this first episode, you get a snapshot of Giuliano. He is, oh, there he is now. He's with us. He is, he's a bit of a sort of catalyst for drama, I suppose. It's my new wrestling name. He's very much sort of like there to you know, keep. I'm glad you enjoyed that one. You don't really see him in the first episode as Giuliano. You see him as someone who is swept up in the events that Lorenzo is driving. Through the course of the rest of the show, you have a man who doesn't believe in God, very important in Italian culture, and doesn't believe in love. And then love comes up and gives him a smack on the face, and he finds himself having to deal with that predominantly through the course of the show. He has the advantage that he doesn't have to do all the clever banking stuff that his brother does. Leave that to the smart guy. And he also doesn't really have the responsibilities that he does have. He does come from a family of wealth, so it sort of gives him an amount of freedom to enjoy himself. And enjoy himself he does. Those episodes I won't be watching with my mum. And yeah, so through the course of it, whilst you are witnessing the foundations of Florence being built, and I suppose Italy as well, Giuliano goes off on his own path to just kind of find meaning for things, which he just doesn't have at the beginning. He's not given a task, he's not given a role, he is the younger brother, and within that he has to find himself.
And do we see you then steering clear of Lorenzo if he's doing all the important bits, you're out of somewhere else, or do we see you still affecting his work and getting in the way maybe, or are you trying to help him and it all goes wrong? How do we see that relationship?
You've picked up on something there. He very much has a loyalty to his family and to his brother, but I think we see that stretched. And you're right to mention it because there's contrasting ideas, I suppose, of what is important in life. And as Lorenzo becomes more enveloped in looking after his family in Florence, I think Giuliano sees. It's not that he becomes more frivolous about life, but he just sees importance in other things.
I believe that Julian, little by little, find his place in the family, especially towards the end. No? He realized what he's doing, why he's doing it.
Yeah.
He starts sharing Lorenzo's vision.
He has a slightly traumatic journey to help him find that. You'll get to see that one. But it's not as, it's just, I suppose, not as conventional. He's very much sort of has his own path to, as I'm repeating myself now, but he has his path that he finds himself on, which is away from the sort of banking and almost criminal element of Medici.
And Alessandra, we see we meet Lucrezia towards the end of the first episode, and we obviously clearly learn that she's married and is in a relationship with Lorenzo. So just tell us, tell us a bit more about the character and how do we see her progress. As I think if you history buffs will know that maybe it's not a happy end to their relationship, but tell us a bit more about her, and then do we see her, influencing Lorenzo maybe, or what shape does she play in the drama that's to unfold?
Well, it's a beautiful character actually. I don't know if you can hear me. Is it okay?
Yep.
Here we go. There we go. It's a beautiful character actually, and at the beginning of their relationship, Lucrezia is actually the only person that.
He's just gonna stay perfectly still.
Okay, something like that. The only person that knows Lorenzo for what he is, and she's everything for him. At the beginning, she's kind of like a friend, but also a lover, and she knows the soul of him, and she can tell him what he will be, even if he doesn't know yet what person he will become. And she loves him. She loves him desperately. She is married, but marriage at that time wasn't probably something that they would do it for love, but sometimes about family. That's a little bit awkward, but it's fine. I'm not gonna move. But she is the same person that's gonna step back when she would realize that Lorenzo has to become the magnificent and has to follow the path that life and his family is gonna write for him. It's more interesting maybe if I put the 2 seasons actually all together. It's a beautiful arch. So I really hope that you're going to see even the end of that arch, and it's going to be the third season, where she is going to have a big change, and even the faith that she feels for him is going to kind of like collapse as well. But that's another story.
Yeah.
But I think it's a beautiful character because all the women in our story, in our show, are really modern compared what you can actually think about women in the past. They definitely not the protagonists of this story, but they work in the background and they move everything and everybody between Lucrezia, Lorenzo's mother, for example, is another amazing figure, and even Clarice is another big female character. So actually, what is amazing is that we talk about a story happened years ago, but it's absolutely modern and it's so about these days. So it's really interesting, and I think that a lot of women can actually see the strength that was there and is still here. So it's
We are able to say that Lucrezia Donati was a really existing character, woman. she was interesting, Lorenzo, even though because she was a woman of culture, intelligent, cultivated. So there was not just a physical relationship, but it was really, really a strong relationship, mental relationship. You know?
So, no, I mean, we haven't met your character yet, Clarissa, but it's funny, Alessandra should mention not marrying for love, because I guess when you and Lorenzo get together, you would say that's maybe in a much more of an arranged situation. So how did you how were you introduced and come into the show?
Yeah, so my character hasn't been introduced yet, but she comes in the second episode.
The show gets much better at
The
that.
show gets really good, so just keep watching. So it's interesting because at the time Florence was I would describe it as being like trendy. So like how we see parts of London now is developing into like very like forward-thinking, contemporary, like young, where all the art's coming out of. And I think that's the best comparison that I drew for myself, was that Florence was this like up-and-coming artistic scene for like young, trendy people, and Rome was like a bit more conservative, much more based on religion and like papal values. And in order for the Medici to have this sort of impact and rule that they wanted to have, they needed the legitimacy of these noble families behind them. And my family was sort of the closest to that they could. They had connections to. The Orsini family was a very noble family in Rome and had a lot of political power through the Pope. And I had loads of relatives that were popes and all worked in that. Yeah, we're all part of that. And so our marriage was sort of set up by Lucrezia, his mother, as means of uniting Rome and Florence and uniting that political power. I wanted to be, Clarice wants to be a nun at the beginning, and she's like not interested in politics, just wants to work in this almshouse and be a nun and like dedicate herself to God. But then she's very quickly persuaded to marry the Magnificent and move to Florence and sort of unite the two cities. Because my character's very religious, and I think for her it's kind of like God's will, like okay, I have to play a part in the future for our country, and I'll make that sacrifice. But it's not something that I think she immediately gravitates towards. And she comes to Rome and everyone's reading, and she's like, I can't read. Like it's a sin. Like what are we doing? Like I can't read this book. Like and everyone there is just very forward thinking and trendy and cool. So.
Yeah, and so do we see her in a position where she's kind of a reluctant sort of wife to Lorenzo then at the start, and slowly their relationship grows and she becomes more influential?
She's very
maybe?
young as well at the beginning. She's like, but it was very young when they got married, and she's going to this completely new place, marrying somebody, and they don't even really get married. They get married by proxy. So she's marrying somebody else is standing in for him. It's all just it's like this. It's kind of heartbreaking because you try and put yourself in that situation and it seems it would be so anxiety provoking, but she has to present herself as a wife and almost like a queen and a mother and all of these things, and she's still in her late teens, early 20s, and she's sort of thrown in at the deep end. But it's interesting because I think he looks on her as this very innocent, very young sort of girl who's just so naive to everything and believes in God and everything is, God's will. And then as the story unfolds, she becomes kind of like his go-to, and it's the two of them that end up really like leading together, especially in the third series. It's much more about their relationship and their children and them growing old together. And as you were saying, with Sarah Parish, Lucrezia, the character Lucrezia, Clarice becomes that sort of like powerhouse behind this great male figure who was the leader not just because he was magnificent but also because he was a man, and he has so much support behind him coming from his mother and Clarice, and you see it behind the scenes, and you see them in their offices talking and sort of making up plots together. So
I think that's really been the secret of our success. To the degree you can say we've been successful is we not only have really great male characters, but the women in the show are really strong and complex and fully realized, and we kind of had to rescue them from history, because of course people weren't by and large recording the history of women in the 15th.
Yeah.
And so we had to kind of imagine who must they have been and what must they have done based on the bits of history that remain. And it's been really, I think it's what makes the show, really.
How then did you, if these women have been sort of forgotten from history, how then did you sort of shape them for the show? Did you have to do a lot of research, or how did you create these characters that we see on screen?
Yeah, I struggled to find, surprisingly, because there's so much written about Lorenzo, and I was his, Clarice is his wife, and they have, in history, they have 10 kids together, and she's such a huge part of Italian history, and I struggled to find a lot of detailed stuff written about her. So it was picking together all of these things from different books and what you find online, and then what's in the writing, and trying to give this person a story and a history that you hope is as true to the real, the real history, and telling her story as truthfully as possible.
Sandra, is that the same for you?
Yeah, unfortunately, Lucrezia Donati doesn't have a lot of history behind her, so it was definitely a male history over there. But there was a beautiful painting, and I look for the information. Actually, what it's written about her, it's a little bit different from what we tell. So it was a little bit, a double line, so I preferred then follow the script, otherwise it was a bit confusing. So I followed the script, and with the costume designer, Alessandra Mastronardi is, I think, one of the masterpieces in this show, and with him we create this beautiful woman that I wanted to embrace and say, okay, I'm gonna give you justice.
It's all quite I would say superficially touched on, when you look back in history. So it's about trying to find a grounded, I don't know, sort of a voice to these people that just don't really exist in our in what's written, and trying to give them a full,
justice.
I don't know, justice of these people had a full life, and yet there was only maybe a tiny paragraph written about them in a book. So it's trying to scope that out and dig deeper into that.
Yeah, and you will see the modern parallels meant to you with the story, and did that inform your performances to bring a bit of modernity to it, or were you very much playing sort of 15th century characters?
For me, it was really important to get the time. That was why I wanted to do this job so much, was it's so different, even just walking around in this period. It's the way you hold yourself as a woman is so specific, and there were just so many rules. So I think that it is quite a stretch in terms of it's not contemporary in a lot of ways, but in the way that we explore relationships, I think it is, because I mean most of the time when I see Renaissance work, TV or film, it describes people that seem very old, and it seems very, in history. It doesn't seem very relevant. Whereas I think what's striking about this is it feels like it's telling a contemporary. It's talking about young people, and it's talking about the trendy parts of Florence and all of these things that I think we can relate to, and it's giving that youth a voice in Renaissance history.
Right. And it's young cast, international cast. What was it like for you all, just being on set in these huge, immaculate locations, the real locations, the costumes? What does that just bring to you all as a cast, and how was it for you on set?
We hated each other. No,
I feel a bit for people having to listen to this answer to this question, because you sit there, I put myself in your shoes here, and you get cast. I imagine you get it all the time going, we had a great time out in Italy. We had a great time out in Italy. We went to all these locations that I would have no business going to, all these sort of little small towns that hadn't been touched for 500 years, 600 years.
And we kind of take over the town. There was nobody else.
Took over the town. There's a whole gang of us. We were
There was 2 restaurants.
20 of us hanging out. It was like being back at school. It was brilliant.
Yeah, it was great.
How does that make you feel, guys?
It was very unique. I don't think we've had it was amazing.
I love my job. It's brilliant. brilliant. I absolutely love it. We work hard. I want to try and convince you of that, but also we enjoy ourselves because you get to go to these places. You get to see things that you'd never see. There's certain parts of Italy I would never think to speak to a travel agent. Say, shall I go to some random?
You should, by the way, Bradley.
I should.
I'm Italian. I'm not talking about.
I should, but I
should.
wouldn't. I wouldn't. And thanks to this show and this experience, I got to see things that opened my mind in a way that it wouldn't have done. I'd have been this, sort of uncultured shell before. But now, as you can see, I'm a flourishing man of the world.
Probably a good time to open up to any questions from the audience if anyone would like to ask anyone a question. I think, do you have some microphones? Yeah, there's a gentleman at the front.
I can just shout.
We can do impersonations of Dan and Sean Bean if you want to ask them a question.
Well, my question is about Sean. What does he bring to the piece? And from that point of view, if you had, I know you do, Bradley, but if you all had scenes with him, what were they like to film? What was he like to work with?
Well, Sean obviously has a wealth of experience. He also, lots of actors have experience, but Sean is, a very popular actor, and the reason for that is, what he does is very good. So you have to, I think you spend the first day or so on set kind of studying him, and before someone's sort of saying, Bradley, it's your line. You have to say that now. And I go, okay. But he brings a sort of like, here's how I'm going to put it. You throw a football at a kid, and they try and trap the ball, bounces off the foot, doesn't look good. You throw a football at, let's not even say Messi, right? Let's say Glenn Hoddle. You throw a ball at Glenn Hoddle. He's older now. You wouldn't put him in a team, but I bet his first touch is sublime because he doesn't have to think about it. Sean Bean is Glenn Hoddle.
You said he's old. He's just gone old.
Sean Bean is older than us, yeah. Sean Bean went
I
to...
think it wouldn't like it.
Sean Bean was born before I am.
An old actor.
No, but Glenn Hoddle... Anyway, we're getting down a road that we don't need to go down.
Get it.
It's you get a great opportunity to work with a man like Sean because you're learning, you're subconsciously and consciously you're picking up lots of things. So I would dare say that anyone who did a scene with him is probably caught in that moment of just kind of seeing how it's done.
I would just add, I don't think I've ever met an actor who is more different off-screen than on-screen. Off-screen, he's just very lovely.
To you, maybe.
Yeah, to me, he's very rude. He's lovely, soft-spoken, quiet. And then the camera rolls, and he's this lion. It's like, oh my God, where did that come from? And his intelligence in every sense, emotional, physical, intellectual, and he's one of those actors who there's a world beyond what's on the page in every moment that he's on screen. And I think what's also interesting is, the Medici, especially in this series, represent idealism, right? I mean, I think Giuliano is cynical, whereas Lorenzo is idealistic, and that's part of what the two brothers quarrel about. But, the Pazzi represent order and the way things have always been and not wanting to change. And the lengths you will go to preserve order in what you have. And I think he does it in a way where he is a villain, but a weirdly poignant and sympathetic villain at the same time. I think that's why everybody always wants to work with Sean Bean, because he brings that to everything.
Right. Any other questions? There's one on the back.
This is more for the creators and producers, but did you ever consider making this a dual language title, especially with local language titles doing so well at the moment?
Oh, yeah. No, honestly, no, because we started the idea since the beginning with Frank, and Frank, as a creator of the show, is English, and I don't know if doing it in Italian would have been the right choice, because even we wanted to try to make our period drama travel all over the world, without the barrier, the Italian barrier. I know that nowadays a lot of shows are made in local language, but maybe they are more contemporary. And we were thinking that maybe period, we are accustomed to have it in English. We don't want to challenge UK for period drama because you are the expert and the master in the world. But I mean, we were trying to make it easier.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you can do. It's funny because we're in a time of changing audience tastes and preferences.
Oh yeah.
And I think, like Luca said, you could do a contemporary or a 20th century drama, and it could be in Italian or a mix of Italian and English, and audiences would actually insist upon that. But if you go back in time 400 or 500 years, I think people are still very comfortable having this be an English language drama, even though it's about Italian characters, and you're still going to reach a much bigger audience than you would if you'd done it in Italian language. So I think that's the thing. We want to reach this big audience and tell an Italian story and bring Italian culture to this big audience. And this is an Italian show through and through. There's a lot of British actors and an Italian American writer. By the way, I have an Italian passport as well, American passport. But it's an Italian show. And I'm really proud to be part of bringing Italian culture to the world, and being in English language allowed us to do that, to reach more people.
But Frank is studying Italian every day. As soon as he'll be able to write, maybe we can try to make it.
Yes, give me a couple of years.
Right, any more questions? Well, I'll just wrap up by, you've mentioned season 3 a couple of times. Can you just tell us a bit about what we can expect after the Puzzi conspiracy and the fallout from that, and I guess how you hope to continue bringing Italian drama to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I love this season. This ends at a dark, dramatic, and like I said, really, I find heartbreaking climax. And then the next season, it's how you carry on, and it's a whole other set of challenges because it's a more adult Lorenzo and Clarice and Lucrezia Donati and other characters I'm not going to say, but there's also a backlash of populism and fundamentalism. Again, it feels incredibly contemporary and relevant, and it's very emotional. And as I said, there's lots of shades of gray. And to me, it's the kind of television that I always aspire to make, which is television that entertains you, I hope, but also gives you something to think about.
Fantastic. Right, well, on that note, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.
Hey!